I offer you this morning a love story, one that I have never told in its entirety in a sermon. This is a painting of me that hangs in my home. It was painted by a local artist named Kate Blue, who happens to be the mother of my daughter's wife. She painted this from a photo that was taken of me at the wedding of our two daughters on May 1st, 2017. At that time, I was serving the Napa congregation. Some of them up here have heard a part of this story, but not all of it. The wedding was held in Napa at the home of my stepmother and father. I was so excited about this wedding that I was actually, in the months leading up to it, willfully ignoring some physical symptoms that I was experiencing: fatigue, difficulty eating, abdominal pain. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to go into testing because I was so healthy. Nothing was ever wrong with me when I went to the doctor. And, it was probably nothing serious, and nothing was going to keep me from being at that wedding. About 4 days before the wedding, a friend finally convinced me that I really should go in. My doctor poked at me and ordered some lab tests, and when the results came back the next day, I'll never forget it, I was in the office at the Napa congregation. It was clear that there was something extremely very wrong. My liver enzymes were elevated by a factor of 1,000. An ultrasound was ordered the following day. I tried not to worry because I just figured whatever it was, I would just deal with it after the wedding. The next day was beautiful and sunny, as you can see, and the wedding was perfect, almost. During the ceremony, a phone call came in, and when I listened to the message during the reception, it was a Kaiser doctor who told me that I needed to come to the emergency room, like, immediately. He said, "Don't wait, you're very, very ill." We drove to the Kaiser in Walnut Creek, and that evening I was admitted. The next few days, the doctors ran many, many tests and asked me many questions about my lifestyle, my drinking habits, supplement use, even potential poisoning. My liver was clearly struggling, but the doctors were still hopeful that it would recover on its own. My husband and I were just dazed and beginning to get scared, but we tried to keep up our spirits, as you can see from the buttons I had on my hospital gown. I think there's a Giants one, and fun is my spiritual path. It was May 4th, may the 4th be with you, and come to the dark side. We have cookies. My daughter was preparing to leave on her honeymoon in Alaska. We decided not to tell her anything until we kind of knew what was going on. My son was in school in the peninsula, and we didn't tell anyone else, pretty much. I didn't want to tell anyone else, not even no one in the congregation knew at that point. After 5 days in the hospital, I was no better, and my doctors began to mention the possibility that I might need a liver transplant. On Friday, May 5th, I was transferred to UCSF for that evaluation. It was late at night when the ambulance took me, and I remember watching the lights of the bridge pass by because I was in the back on a gurney, and I remember wondering if that would be the last time I ever crossed that bridge. At UCSF, I went through a battery of tests to determine if I was a good candidate for a transplant. Friends called. I knew the head chaplain at UCSF at the time, so the chaplains poured in. I remained resolutely optimistic, but I was beginning to suspect that I would die. On the 6th day at UCSF, I sent an email to a few clergy friends and told them that if my time were here, I was at peace with that. I had done the things that were most important to me. I had found and lived with an amazing partner. I had 2 wonderful kids, incredible friends, meaningful work, and more happiness and good fortune than I deserved. I felt myself letting go of the future as I fell asleep that night. That was the night I was moved to the top of the transplant list. By morning, my nurses could not wake me. I had fallen into a hepatic coma, which happens when the liver stops processing blood toxins and they build up and the brain swells. I was transferred to the ICU and dilation was started to keep me alive. My husband was informed that I had just a few days to live unless a liver was found. My daughter was still on her honeymoon in Alaska, but at this point my husband and son tried to call the cruise ship she was on to let her know that she should come home to say goodbye. Luckily, they didn't reach her. Because late that evening, well after my doctor informed my husband that miraculously a donor had been found. By the time my husband reached my daughter, he was able to give her the good news that I was to receive a transplant the next day and she could stay on the ship. After the operation, the surgeon came to the waiting room where my husband, son, and brother-in-law were waiting, and she told them that my liver had looked like a piece of mud. But the donated liver was young and healthy, and the operation went well. I woke up from the transplant 3 days later on my 58th birthday. One of the first things I remember seeing was a bunch of balloons that someone at the Napa congregation had sent. And then there was my husband's face. Those first few days were spent in terrifying hallucinations caused by the toxins, anesthesia, and high-dose steroids. But I had been in good physical shape, and because of that, I recovered quickly. Just 3 weeks after I was admitted and 1 week post-transplant, I was discharged. And although I'm putting on a brave face in this photo, that t-shirt on my stomach is a t-shirt that you get rewarded with on 9 Long, the transplant ward, if you walk a mile around the ward. So I had done that day and I was pretty happy. And I didn't feel very brave, even though I tried to put on that face. I was confused, I was bereft, and I was just terrified. During those first few weeks at home, I tried desperately to come to grips with what had happened, the gravity of what had happened to me, and the terror of what my family had been through. My liver had failed catastrophically, and my doctors never could tell me why. Probably autoimmune hepatitis, they said, which is what they say when they have no idea. Organ transplants are transformative. After a transplant, there are lifestyle changes, such as daily medication, changes in diet, abstinence from alcohol, and monthly blood tests. But those changes were not much to me compared to the overall emotional and psychological impact of the experience. I wasn't a typical liver transplant recipient who suffers for years on the transplant list. For those folks, the transplant offers an end to their suffering. I had a completely different perspective. Inside of a month, I went from being a strong, self-sufficient, energetic, competent wife, mother, and minister to a weak, shaking, grief-stricken individual who could barely write her own name or remember my birthday. I couldn't prepare my own food. I couldn't change my clothes. I couldn't shower. I couldn't even walk without help. I was so dependent on others, utterly dependent. I thought constantly about why I was still alive, how I was still alive, and then there was the matter of my donor. All they could tell me was that he was a 16-year-old boy from Southern California. I felt so guilty that this child had died, and I, in my late 50s, had survived. It was so unfair. I lay awake at night wondering what had happened, wondering how his family was coping. I couldn't imagine. I tried desperately to come to grips with my donor's death, my own survival, and my past carefree, healthy life that in a flash was gone. With much support from my family, my transplant team, and my friends, I recovered physically. It took about a year. Coming to terms with the emotional and psychological trauma took a lot longer, but I got there. I had so much help from loved ones and a very good therapist, and I came to see how and why my life was saved, despite the extraordinary odds against me. What pulled me back from the brink of death was simply love. I was literally loved back to life. This love started with my donor and his family. It's possible that he himself had designated himself as an organ donor when he got his driver's license, or he hadn't and his family just agreed once it became clear that he would not recover. Either way, that act of love is the only reason I'm standing up here speaking to you today, the only reason my husband has a wife, my children have a mother, and you have 2 consulting ministers. Incredible as that act of love was, an act of love for a person they might not never know anything about, it took so much more than just their love on that agonizing day. The science of transplantation isn't new. I've learned that in the past 50 years, there have been countless researchers, students, pharmacists, and physicians who worked in labs, published findings, conducted clinical trials, and sat by the bedsides of patients who submitted to these trials. I take anti-rejection drugs that were developed, tested, and manufactured by people, and all these people contributed to saving my life. It took a transplant surgeon, a woman who decided to give her whole life to the work of transplantation, just so she could save people like me. It took nurses to tend me and lab techs to draw my blood and techs to test it. It took a donor agency to reach out to my donor's family on what was certainly the most agonizing day of their lives. Yet these people, sure, they were doing their jobs, but think about it. They all chose jobs that involved caring for strangers, for others, for folks they would never see again or even meet. All these people did these things because they cared about people like me, sick, dying, hopeless. To my mind, this is the very definition of love, but still more was needed. Closer to home, my husband bravely navigated his way through the many decisions and mountains of paperwork that were required for the transplant as I lay dying. My brother-in-law donated blood and vows to continue to do so until he has replaced 50 units I used. My friends and colleagues prayed without ceasing and sent cards and letters, brought food, and took care of my home while my husband was with me. I have a picture of my hospital room, and the walls are covered with cards. And at one point, the nurse came in and asked me, "Who are you?" My son left school, and my daughter returned from her honeymoon to help take care of me. Each of these acts, every one of them, from organ donation to coordination to surgery to nursing care, from letters and prayers to meals and house sitting, were acts inspired by love of fellow humans, love of life, love of that great big thing that connects all of us. The story of my survival was not about me. It was about the sheer power of love that connects us all, love that is stronger than death. 4 months after my transplant, I was able to return to work at Napa. This photo was taken while I was hiking in the Grand Canyon with 2 other ministers. It was just 1 year after the transplant. I was feeling like my old self again, but I still had questions that kept me awake at night. I thought constantly about my young donor and his family, wishing I could thank them, wanting them to know how sorry I was for their loss, and how grateful I was for their gift. Organ donation is an act of love and compassion so vast and generous that it literally bestows life, relieving the suffering of multiple families. The reverberations of the love inherent in donation can permanently change the stories of families like mine for generations, allowing children to be born who otherwise wouldn't have been, permitting other children like mine to grow up with the love and support of a parent who would have otherwise been dead, and giving older people like me the opportunity to meet and care for any grandchildren that might come. Organ donation transforms a tragic ending into something more meaningful. I know this is true because I had the opportunity to meet my donor's family. This is Khalid Conant Madrigal. He died on May 9, 2017. I was the recipient of his liver. At least 4 other lives were saved when his family donated his organs. And this is the story of how we met. In late September of 2019, I received the news that my donor's family wanted to meet me. So this was 2.5 years after the transplant. I had written a letter to them about 6 months after the transplant, but because my donor was so young, I hadn't really expected to hear back from them. If ever. I mean, I was thinking about what I would feel like if my 16-year-old child had died. I was beside myself with anticipation and some trepidation. What would they think when they found out that their young son's liver had gone to a woman in her late 50s? After some back and forth, our meeting day was set for a Friday in November at the office of One Legacy in Southern California. Luckily, my husband and children agreed to drive with me to Los Angeles, so they insisted. The day finally arrived. By the time we were finally led into the room where Khalid's family was waiting, I was shaking, utterly overwhelmed with emotion. The first person I was introduced to was Khalid's mother. Our eyes met, and we embraced, just sobbing. From there, it was just a blur of handshakes and hugs. Khalid's father is on the right, then my 2 children, my husband, me. That's Khalid's mother next to me, and his sister and aunts and cousins. We sat together in a circle, and I asked them to tell me everything about Khalid. They brought stacks of photos, and the next 90 minutes passed in this blur of stories and laughter and tears. It was so moving to finally have a name, a face, a story of a bright, energetic, smart, fun-loving boy, taken away by a tragedy that we never ended up discussing specifically. Khalid's father described a moment that I found particularly moving as they watched the helicopter with Khalid's gifts of life taking off from the roof of the hospital. He thought to himself, "There goes my son back into the universe." This is Khalid's mother. She spoke to me that day of the comfort it brought her to meet me and my family. She realized on that day that without Khalid, my children, who were not much older than her own, would be motherless. She was gracious in expressing gratitude that my life was saved. Nothing can bring him back or ease his family's pain at his loss, but organ donation transformed the end of his story into a legacy of love left to 5 other families. This photo was taken in Sedona on the same trip to the Grand Canyon. On the ground is my friend, the Reverend Glenn Farley, who was serving the Sedona congregation at that time. My companions, who are all younger and fitter, did this move, and they encouraged me to do it, but I was pretty hesitant. I didn't know, was I strong enough? Would I fall? Was this a very bad idea? But they encouraged me. In the end, I decided to trust that he could hold me. Looking back at this very joyful moment of strength, Khalid reminds me that in life, we are all held in love by one another. And I have decided to trust this love. After the transplant, I ended up retiring from NAPA so that I could focus on my health and my family. My husband and I took a long delayed trip to the UK where I fulfilled a lifelong dream of visiting Stonehenge. I'm often reminded that we are only here by grace and by the power of love. I understand now that we all depend upon that love much more than we imagine, from those who share our present as well as those who share our past. What I want you to remember after today is just how much love matters. Your actions can either contribute to or ease the suffering of others. Which will you choose? Every day you make choices that affect others, small choices and big choices. How you speak, how you act and react, how you spend your money, how you spend your time. I hope you will make it a practice as often as you can to be as kind and compassionate as you can. This especially applies to the ones close to you. Take tender care of those people. Make them a priority. Those relationships are more important than your job, your bank account, or your busy schedule. The people you love, the people who love you, will be there for you when tragedy strikes or when your health fails, and it will fail. Don't fool yourself. I promise it will fail. I know from firsthand experience that the care of family members and others can pull you through even after you have given up hope. Give that gift of care to them and also accept it when it is offered to you. Let others love you. You are worth it. Our care committee members stand ready to offer you care if you need it. You only need to ask. Before I offer you the most perfect poem about love by Barbara Pescan, I want to let you know that I'm happy to answer any questions you have about my experience, if you have them, including how to become an organ donor. And this poem is called Love Abides. Often we are found in grief and comforted, calmed by some kindness, brought alive by the beauty that catches us undefended. Even when the sun is most thin and far, even at the hour the storm is at its height, we can go through. Renewal nests within sorrow. Love abides even beyond anger, beyond death. We are held in an embrace invisible but infinite, moving with all creation between wholeness and fragmentation, moving always toward the one. Small joys and great sorrows pass, and we, with steps uncertain, move on to whatever is next. But continually seen, heard, held by life infinite and remote, intimate and abiding. Love, do not let us go. Amen.